All right, go ahead.
Perfect. Great. Well, welcome everybody to our Halloran Speaker Series, and thanks everybody for joining us today. Today's topic is on building and leading your product development team, skill sets, challenges, and solutions. Today's discussion is going to be led by our strategy and program leadership team, and we'll get to introductions in just a minute. But we're really excited about bringing this topic to you because development teams of all sizes require resources and direction as their programs move through each stage of development. And a strong development team requires really a particular structure and leader, and providing measured guidance and critical support at those key inflection points at those various stages, and really looking to ensure success of the program and de-risking of programs. So there's certainly a lot to consider and a lot at stake. So we have a great team today to talk it out and get into the details here. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping items. So please, keep yourself on mute. We are going to have time at the end for questions. So if you have a question, as the panelists are talking, please just enter your question into the chat feature there on Zoom. And at the end, we're going to open it up for Q&A. If you've dialed in on the phone, if you would like to unmute, just press *6 and that'll unmute you as well, please. So we welcome any questions as we go through it. We are recording today's session too, so it will be available if you want to refer to it later. We'll send out some notes and the recording after the session as well. Okay, so before we get started then too, and for those that maybe don't know us here at Halloran, we are a life sciences consulting firm, really providing a lot of that deep kind of domain expertise across the areas of development strategy and program leadership, across the areas of regulatory, quality, and clinical. And we also provide organizational solutions and technology enablement services really to advance these functions of development to that next level of or stage of growth. Here at Halloran, we're always looking for ways to share our insights, our learnings with all of you in the life sciences community. So we started our speaker series just a few years ago to have our own experts share their expertise and knowledge really to all of our community. So now I would like to introduce our strategy and program leadership practice group that's led by Matt Cardinal, who's going to be actually moderating our session today. This group comprises our Halloran experts with the deep expertise in both the science and advanced knowledge of development, and across really all of the life cycles, stages, through commercialization. We really lead our clients through really the most challenging business goals to achieve their greatest chance of success. Whether we're leading new company formation with a fully integrated development team at the ready, providing development program leadership, enabling investments with robust diligence or market assessments, or providing accelerated durable development strategies for enhanced company value creation. This team is certainly at the ready. So I'm happy to, sort of announce our strategy and program leadership group here, who's going to be managing and sort of moderating and on the panel here today. So I'm going to pass it on to Matt Cardinal to have him introduce himself and also bring in the panel as well. So take it away, Matt.
Thank you, Paula. Hi, everyone. My name is Matthew Cardinal. I head up our strategy and program leadership group, as Paula mentioned. I've been with the firm for a little over 2.5 years at this point, focusing in a broad range of different activities, specializing particularly in the early stages of development with companies that are advancing programs from discovery biology and lead optimization through those IND enabling activities, but also all the way through commercialization. I have a similar background in that from my time at Pfizer and Novartis. And so I'm really happy to be joined by my esteemed colleagues here today. And so I'll pass it over to Katie for an introduction.
Hello, nice to be with everyone today. My name is Katie Georgiadis. I'm a relatively recent hire to Halloran. I started in the summer, but it's been a great experience so far. I work with Matt as well as the rest of the strategy group, And my area of expertise is really early stage development. I was at Pfizer for a number of years, and I was in a discovery unit there where I led programs into the clinic. So I have extensive experience in assay development, translational strategies, biomarker strategies, and I work with teams really in this early stage, usually post candidate selection into IND enabling and phase 1 studies. So I'll pass it over to Julia next.
Hi, everyone. So I'm Julia Liebenau, formerly Ogier, if you've worked with me in the past. So I have been with Halloran for about 5.5 years now. And I started out doing clinical operations and some regulatory project management. And then a few years ago, I really hit my stride and found program management. And that's what I've been doing for the last couple of years. And like Katie, it's kind of in that discovery through end of phase 1 into phase 2 stage. That's where most of my projects are. So Erica, I'll pass it to you.
Yeah. Hi, all. I'm Erica Dahl. I've been with Halloran just about 4 years now. And like Katie and Julia, I've had quite a few roles here that have spanned clinical, regulatory, quality. I haven't touched tech ops yet. But generally speaking, my role within Halloran and with my clients is program leadership and development, both from those pre-IND enabling programs, and then I have a few that are in later stages in that phase 2, phase 3 area. So thank you all for coming, and Matt, I'll let you kick off the questions.
Thank you all. And I'm really excited to have this conversation with my teammates. They're exceptional at their jobs, but I'd like to start off also with canvassing the audience so we can maybe set the stage a little bit about what we're going to talk on. And we have some polling questions and we'll launch those now. So if you could please enter your answers, you'll see a screen shoot up from Zoom and they're multiple choice. And this will help us gain some insight into maybe some of the challenges that you all see and some of the things that you're facing in terms of forming and leading your development teams.
And there are 3 questions, just scroll down to get to all of them.
So we'll give everybody a minute or two to answer those. And then we'll go over the results.
Just going to give it 1 more minute, Matt, and then
Sure.
a poll and launch the results. Okay.
Okay, great. So our first question was, what's missing from your development team? And we have a broad range of answers, nothing really dominating, but 3 that are all tied for the lead. Strategic thinking, broad experience, and subject matter expertise. And I think, honestly, all of these could probably be a common thread amongst a number of the development team compositions that we see throughout all stages of development. And we'll touch on some of those topics during our conversation as we go forward over the next 40 minutes, but I would certainly welcome the audience to ask any other questions to dig a little deeper into why some of those issues are present for your development team. The second question is, if you lack subject matter expertise, which subject would be most impactful to your team? The number 1 answer was regulatory, not necessarily surprising. But then slightly after that, commercial, which I tend to hear quite often. And, certainly for a lot of earlier stage companies, maybe not something that they're thinking about for their overall development team, but very important to have that insight as you move an asset going forward. But of course, all of these are applicable, and you can see that in the responses from the audience. And then the third question is, what is your team's biggest pain point? And we see 2 that I guess in some ways could be sort of similar, but early strategic planning and decision alignment. And, I know from my background, those go hand in hand, where you're looking to cement an early strategic plan so you can align on the decisions when new data come out and you're ready to make investment decisions and development decisions. So this is all really interesting input from you all. Thank you for participating in the survey, and we hope to touch on some of these points as we move forward in the conversation. So with that, we will go ahead and get started, and I am going to moderate, as was mentioned before. But this is going to be a free-flowing discussion, a bit unscripted, and my teammates will also ask questions of me and ask questions of each other. And so I'm actually going to start off with what I think is personally maybe a very important question to ask, and I would like to get everybody's opinion on this, but I'm going to start with Erica. What does leadership mean to you?
I don't know if I can necessarily answer the exact question of what it means to me, but I can tell you what my style is, which maybe will get to the point that we're trying to make here. So I think leadership in a lot of cases is leading by example, and it's showing commitments to your teams to show that you're part of it, and showing up for people, working just as hard as everyone else, even if you are not necessarily a full-time employee. And so, leadership to me is leading by example. And that may seem trite, but it's what I got.
That's a great answer. And I actually completely agree with that. Katie, what do you think leadership means?
So for me, leadership is really having great listening skills and being able to listen to everybody's opinion and put it all together. Because a lot of times people tend to think of their own kind of maybe their own practice area, their own experience that they've had, either technical or just what they've done in their most recent past, and they can't necessarily see the other perspectives or be able to integrate it into a bigger plan. So I think a true leader is able to take all these little pieces, put them together into a puzzle, and then come up with a bigger picture plan, and get also his or her teammates to pressure test it a little bit and give some feedback as to what they think. So those are my thoughts on leadership.
That's great input. Julia, how about you? What do you think?
I agree. I think the other piece is giving your team enough direction that they feel empowered to make decisions and do what they need to do. So, there's a nice balance of being involved to a level where you can help when needed, but not micromanaging everyone. And so I think it's just important that you adapt your leadership style too, based on whoever you're working with and what they need from you. So I don't think it's necessarily always the same answer for every team that you're working with.
Great. And I think, for me, another aspect of leadership is knowing how to build a team, or understanding where maybe the gaps on your team exist and being able to address those as necessary. Erica, I'm interested maybe in your thought process or your philosophy on drug development specifically. How do you build a team if you haven't had a chance to choose it? It's been pre-chosen for you, and maybe thinking about the phase of development that you would go through.
Yeah, absolutely. So by and large, the situations that I'm in, I walk into teams that have been pre-chosen for me. And so once that happens, then I rely really heavily on my soft skills. I think generally speaking, when you first are introduced to a team, it's really worthwhile to set expectations. What do I expect out of people? What should they expect out of me? What roles is everyone playing? And what do I need from people and when? And just generally having that stage set, I think, makes it so that things are a lot smoother and more efficient, because then there's no guesswork in between. There's no surprises. You know what you need from me. I know what I need from you. So that's one part of it. And then based on the team for development stages, I think it's really looking at trying to break down those stages into smaller pieces. So let's say our next milestone is an IND. Then let's think about all of the pieces that go into an IND and everyone that needs to be a part of that. And then let's build that team. What I've seen happen a lot of times is you have, the proverbial too many cooks in the kitchen, and you just end up having far too many people in meetings. Too many people are trying to make decisions and it becomes a mess. And to have an efficient team, it's really worthwhile to make sure that your team and whoever's in your meetings need to be there. Everything is geared towards them and they're the right people to have. That's an iterative process. I'm not perfect at it by any means. And we learn every day on it. But I think those are the two main pieces, is just your soft skills on, how to lead a team. And then the second piece is just making sure you've got the right people.
I completely concur about, maybe having too many people at a given time being a very challenging issue. Julia, I don't know if you share some of the same views on that.
Yeah, it's actually something I'm dealing with right now because I'm on a project where it's been a group of scientists from the beginning, and they've all been very collaborative and working together every day, but it's time that they really grow in what they're doing, and they're hiring a lot of new people as they move to that next stage of development. So I think change management is really important, understanding that because we're changing the structure of our meetings and how we conduct meetings doesn't mean that we're leaving people out. It's how do we get the most productivity out of a meeting? So, working on how to communicate that to everyone in a way that makes sense and works for everyone. It's not going to be the same for every company and every project. So I think it's also about kind of how we communicate these things as leaders to the groups that we're working with.
And Katie, I think Julia hit on a very important point, which I know you've experienced many times when you're working with people of varying backgrounds and experience. How do you get that group to really focus in on that next development milestone, that stage gate to advance products forward, especially in, that early stage of development, discovery biology, the translational phase, where there's so much that needs to be ironed out. There's so many things going on. How do you get that to work?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I have encountered that, and it can be a tricky thing because sometimes, especially clients that we work with have a lot of expertise scientifically, and they're very confident in their biology. And you're coming in from the outside with a different set of eyes, a different different experience. And I think the best way to kind of gain trust, I think that's the first thing that we need to do, is gain trust and make them understand kind of the big picture and how are they going to really advance their product to the next stage. So for instance, let's take a step back. Are we doing the right kind of experiments that are going to enable us to make a decision to advance to the next milestone? Because a lot of times, and I've been, I was at the bench, so I understand this very well. You get really involved in the science and you really want to do experiments because it's so cool and it's so interesting, but is it really going to help you understand, for instance, whether you have target engagement, whether you've got the correct kind of binding, the right selectivity, the right proof of mechanism that you'll need to really show efficacy in the clinic. So I think putting that perspective on it and maybe laying out the plan and some thoughts that the team can really think about. And it takes time. It's not something that can be done right away. So I think over the course of multiple meetings, working meetings, I think is the best way to do it. And I think you can really shift the mindset that way.
I think this is a very interesting segue to something that was polled for our audience, and that now we can weigh in on, maybe based on our experience, both here at Halloran but elsewhere. Is, what do we find that biggest deficiency to be in the team composition, whether that's a specific subject matter expertise or maybe just a type of strategic thinking? Erica, I'll start with you. What do you think that is in your mind?
There's a couple of things that come to mind, but I think most recently what I've really been seeing is a lot of people want to stick to their silos and not think about how things integrate, which is fine. And everybody has their specialty, but a lot of people in, let's say, the CMC realm are like, well, I don't have anything to do with clinical. No, you do, because you have drug supply and we have to think about that, and we've got to talk to the clinical folks and we have to do that. So I think that's a big deficiency, but that's a place where you're project manager, your program lead, your whoever that person is, can help be that go-between and really connect your teams. On the quality side, we see it all the time. Quality spans all pieces of organizations, but people want to think of it as one silo. And so that would be the biggest deficiency I see, is just sometimes that cross collaboration doesn't happen because people don't want to step on others' toes, when in fact you sometimes need to. So that would be, my answer there that I've been seeing lately, at least.
Absolutely agree. And I'll jump in here because I like to always give my side of things. I think it was the second number 2 answer for this for the poll, and it was mentioned that maybe a commercial subject matter expertise, and especially in like the early stages of development. I see that commonly, and I think that ties into more of the strategic development planning that needs to happen really for every single asset that's in development, thinking with the end in mind, right? And that's also how you build a team to successfully move a program forward. Julia, in your experience, common deficiency, is it a particular skill set? Is it a type of thinking? What do you think?
Well, my answer was commercial for that, because I think it kind of goes hand in hand where people aren't looking to the future. They're very focused on the next milestone, like the IND, and they're not thinking about what their program will look like through NDA, through marketing authorization. So I guess it may not be a specific functional area, but it's more generally that strategic planning and thinking. I think time and time again, we see companies that are just plowing ahead and they haven't taken the time that is really needed. And it's a lot of time, I think, that it takes to do this, but to really step back and look at their program as a whole and where they want to be in 10 years, 15 years, whatever it might be. So, doing that, helping to encourage them to do that is something that as a program lead, I take very seriously, but it's also, it can be a difficult thing to do because you don't want to come off like you're questioning everything that they've already are planning. So collaboratively getting everyone in a room together to think through where they want to take the company, where they want to take the asset. It's also a big time and money investment. So convincing them that this is something that's really important to do. It's not that it's hard to convince someone to do it, but you do have to explain to them why. So I think, I think Matt, you've seen that too, where companies are just moving forward without taking a holistic view of their programs and their company.
Absolutely, all the time.
Yeah, and I would add one more thing to the comments is just from my perspective, a lot of times there's not enough emphasis on sort of the clinical pharmacology and tying that into the toxicology plan, because, as I'm sure, most folks in the call are aware, to get those studies designed and slotted with CROs, NHP studies, other kinds of pharmacology safety studies. It takes a really advanced, you have to do it very well in advance, and you really have to make sure that your endpoints, the species are all relevant to or tied to your efficacy studies and make sense biologically. So I do see that something that sometimes is overlooked in a small company just because there's not enough funding to hire that capacity internally.
Yeah, and on that same point, that would be my number 2 that would be missing. And I'm a big proponent of using modeling and simulation techniques to help supplement that as you go forward. And there's a number of services out there that can be used. And, I had experience using that in my prior career, and it was super helpful making sure that drug development programs were successful. And this isn't really like a deficiency on a team, but, I'm Katie, Erica, I'm going to maybe ask you both to weigh in terms of like the scientific expertise that you need to be or need to have to be a development team leader. What do you think needs to be there? Is there just maybe a general level of comfort? Do you have to have deep-seated knowledge in a particular area? What do you think?
Well, I'll go first. Erica, you've always been the first one to answer, so I'll go first this time.
Don't worry, Katie, I was going to default to you as well.
So I think that, the number one thing is really, you have to have the curiosity and be interested to dive into whatever, if it's a therapeutic area, the modality that might be novel, and ask a lot of questions. I think it's very helpful if you've had experience in drug development and if you've seen different phases of the programs at different phases depending on the clients that you're working with. So I think it helps to have done this firsthand. For instance, working in a team that needs to outsource an assay. How do you find the right CROs? How do you ensure that the work is done correctly? I mean, those are pain points for companies often. And so if you've experienced that, it's helpful. And I think breadth of knowledge is always helpful, but you don't need to be, I think, a subject matter expert in a particular therapeutic area necessarily. In fact, I think it's helpful to have a little bit different training because you have a different perspective and you can bring that in to the team.
Yeah, and Katie, I honestly kind of couldn't agree more. I think my way that I think about it is, as a program leader, project manager, whatever you're functioning as, your role is not to be a scientific expert. And Katie and I both have our PhDs, which is great, but I don't have a client right now that's developing something for G protein coupled receptors in the heart, which is what I studied for 5.5 years. And that is just fine. And so I think generally it's that general understanding of science, a curiosity, and then understanding the drug development process and knowing when to ask questions, and then really leaning on your subject matter experts if you do need that level of expertise to, get your job done, let's say for assay development or anything like that. So.
Julia, how about inspiration as a leadership technique? We talk about maybe having scientific expertise, right? Maybe technical expertise. But there are other things that go into being effective leader and manager of like a cross-functional team with a lot of different disciplines. What qualities does a good manager and leader need to have, and is inspiring leadership part of that?
Well, I think to what Erica and Katie were saying, it's really important that you don't assume that you know everything, and we're not the subject matter experts, and that's okay. So knowing when to ask questions or get help in those areas, I think is important. But yeah, Matt, to your point, when you're leading a team, it's often more about those kind of soft skills that we already talked about, or inspiring people, like you said. So I think, there are different ways to go about doing that, but there have also been people in my career here that just are uninspired, and that's kind of the way that it is. And so working with them too, obviously when you have a team that's extremely excited about the asset they're working with and committed to it, it makes things easier. But I have been in situations where that's not necessarily the case. And it's about getting the best out of the team that you're given, especially in our position. We're not usually in a position of changing up team members. So it's about working with who you've got and inspiring them to the best of your ability.
I think it's critical. Katie, I don't know what your thoughts are on this, but I mean, I think it's critical to be able to sort of shift your tactics based on not just the composition of your team, but also the personalities that they have, right? And sometimes that requires you just to use, like Julie and Erica mentioned before, soft skills. In some cases, just general leadership qualities. Do you find that to be effective as well?
Yes, I do. And I think that you learn the personalities of the people that you work with. Some folks are really serious and you just don't feel like you can get them to crack a smile. But as soon as they start talking about their science, they get so excited and they sort of light up. So that's awesome. And so that for that person, talking about the science is the way to break the ice. Other people like to just, they're a little looser, but you really have to figure out what gets people excited. And I think being humble is also helpful as a consultant when we work with teams. It's, as Julia mentioned, we don't know everything. We have to ask a lot of questions. But yeah, lots of different personalities in science and in drug development.
And I think, the interesting thing that we get to work on is just the variety of different programs, different teams, different people, the technical aspects of it, and also the phases of development. So I'm going to maybe ask you all to try to think about, your most common bottleneck based on phase of development for a development team, right? So maybe first let's talk about in those IND enabling stages, what do you think the biggest issue is commonly for a development team in those stages? What do we need to focus on? You know, for example, we talked a little bit about pharmacology, right? And understanding, you know, your pharmacodynamic modeling, something that I'm really keen on. I'd like you all to maybe weigh in on that stage of development. What do you think the development teams most commonly face as an issue during that stage?
I'll
One
go
thing
first. Oh, go ahead, Julia. Sorry, go ahead.
Just quickly, so one thing I've seen a lot of is a lot of the companies that we work with are limited in resources, both people and money. And so it's, you know, they don't have access to these market strategy research kind of things that a lot of companies have access to. So I think, you know, especially when they're in that pre-IND, IND stage. So I think that's something that I've seen a lot of, like just being limited in resources really makes the team, you know, they're not able to do the amount of research and put the amount of time and money into it that they would like to do to assess their strategic pathway.
I think what I've noted is figuring out the correct species to use for their, you know, the non-GLP tox studies and then their GLP IND enabling studies. What species should they use? And what kind of potency assay should they have as endpoints? So that's commonly an issue, and you need to reserve these slots well in advance. The costs are very high, so you have to make sure you pick the correct time points, the correct you know, species, and plan it all way in advance. And that's just something that sometimes the details can fall through the cracks, and then that causes a lot of delays. I've seen that actually recently a couple of different times, different clients. How about you, Matt? Let's put the question to you.
Oh, that's a good one. Good one to flip around to me. You know, I'm going to be adding a different wrinkle here and say it's manufacturing. I think that the number one rate limiting factor for a successful IND, and in my view, really almost a successful drug development program overall, is the ability to make your drug product, make your API, scale it with quality, and suffice regulatory requirements. And this is very difficult for companies that have a limited budget, and especially for companies that are making products like viral gene therapy that is extraordinarily expensive and difficult to manufacture. And I don't think that necessarily some investors and people on the outside understand how complicated it is, and how there's a lot of problem solving that needs to go into that process at a very, very early stage. We're talking maybe years before an IND is filed. And so I think having a light on that as soon as you possibly can and highlighting the risks and potential mitigations is essential to being successful. And to Julia's point before, I do think that what I commonly see is a lot of companies in that stage of development are somewhat understaffed with people who have technical competencies in managing CDMOs and regulatory CMC and other aspects such as that. So I'm gonna have to kick this over to Erica now. And
I have a different take on it as well, based on, again, my current experiences. Is I think the bigger bottleneck, at least what I've been seeing, apart from manufacturing, because that's been hitting everyone lately, is the hesitancy to go to a regulatory meeting. And those meetings, I know that they're a ton of prep work. We've all done a bunch of them. It's a ton of work to get done, but they can be so useful. One, to build rapport with whatever agency you're talking to. And secondly, to really get that feedback, because I've had clients move forward and say, we're just going to file this IND. And then we're on the back end and there's clinical hold issues that can come up. There's a ton of information requests that come up, and there's a little bit of panic, and trying to just de-risk that can be really helpful. And I understand how much work these take, but really having those agency interactions can save you a lot of heartache on the back end when you're then trying to scramble to set up non-clinical studies or manufacturing things that you need to get done, and no one has any capacity for your work to get done. So I think the bottleneck a lot that I've been seeing is really this hesitancy to go toward a regulatory interaction.
Yep, I completely agree with that. And I'm a proponent of going as early as possible and as frequently as possible if those options are on the table. Those are all great pieces of information that you all shared. Thank you. I want to maybe go into some of the tools and tactics now, because I know I'm working with very technically inclined and skilled teammates who use different tools to help manage programs and manage projects and make sure that all of the team members in a cross-functional team are adhering to their development requirements. Are there any specific toolkits, tactics, other types of skill sets that you use on your day-to-day basis as a program manager or program leader for your projects that you think our audience would like to know and that would be valuable for them? Erica, you can start.
That's fine. I use a couple, and I think this needs to be tailored to whatever your team is and whoever you're speaking with. The one is the classic Gantt chart. We all love a good Gantt chart as program leads, but we find that many people won't look at them because either you just don't want to because you don't want to get in the weeds of it and want just someone to tell you the dates. So when those situations happen, I really like a good weekly roundup email that says, here's what I'm expecting from you this week. Here's when it's due. Here's links to everything that needs to get done. Let me know if it's going to not happen. And that really sets the stage for that week and lets people take on whatever development you're doing in smaller chunks so that it feels a little bit more approachable versus saying, hey, this giant thing is due in 6 weeks. Let's get it done. That can be difficult. So, my tools mostly are email and Gantt charts, which isn't all that interesting, but they work. So Julia and Katie, anything else?
Yeah, mine's not that sophisticated either, but a good dashboard, I find that really helpful. Like just somewhere, whether you have a shared box folder or Ignite or SharePoint, you can present it in meetings each week, but a standard format that everyone is used to seeing and knows how to digest that has the major milestones, what things are at risk, where are you, any risks to the program, mitigation strategies, just keeping everyone informed of the highest level and most urgent things in an easy, digestible format. I think that's really important too, that it not be too complicated. So that's my go-to.
Yeah, I would, I agree with what Erica and Julia said. In addition, you have to figure out sometimes how to get the best response from folks that you work with. Some people like to use email, some people don't, they prefer the phone call. So it's nice to know what works best. And in addition to the Gantt chart Erica mentioned, there's also a smart sheet that is kind of an interactive way to keep up timelines. So that's useful. And then, databases that are, of literature and any kind of data that you can find online is always great, but nothing specific there. So how about you, Matt? What are your tools that you like to use?
Yeah, so I'm going to bore everyone with my response because I'm going to be completely honest. I do not like making Gantt charts. I do not like making dashboards. It's just the way I am. But I'm going to show my big pharma bias here, and I like governance and stage gates and the idea of having a pre-specified development team structure and even a charter. I think it's very important for everyone to understand that, the rate of failure, everyone knows this, the rate of failure in drug development is so high. And my general view is, when something is not working very, very early on. So it's important to make sure that those types of decision points and stage gates are enumerated beforehand and not done after the fact. And that's when bias creeps in and you get confirmation bias and you're moving programs forward that quite frankly shouldn't move forward, and you should be reprioritizing your assets and your team. And so I think that that's something that I learned, very gratefully early on in my career, and I saw it used to great effectiveness. And I think that that's something that we can help our clients on and with by putting those in place when it's necessary. But, I understand that there are people who are a little averse to that because they think it's, bureaucracy and it slows things down and we're a small startup and we're just going to go. And so I totally get the different philosophy, but for me, that's what I think can be the most valuable way to do that. Great. So I know we only have a few more minutes left before we're going to pause and maybe take some questions and leave the session open. I would like to maybe get a little bit more into sort of the structure and the composition of the team, and how do we determine when we need to bring in outside support. From my perspective, I think maybe it happens a little bit too late, and it's obviously dependent upon the lack of subject matter expertise at a given phase of development. And Julia, I know you've worked with a lot of different clients of ours, different phases. When is it time to look for that external subject matter expertise that you don't have on your team?
My immediate answer is before you need it. I think a lot of times, like you said, clients and companies wait until they are in desperate need of help. And so identifying that early and putting together a plan it depends on where the company is and what their goals are, whether they're just trying to get to a certain point and then out-license the asset, whether they're trying to become, a commercial company. It all depends, but mapping out exactly what you think the development team should look like at every single stage and planning for that. And then the first whiff that you get that you may need some expertise that you don't have, acting on that, getting agreement from leadership to bring someone like that in. It's almost too easy of an answer, but it's just identifying as soon as possible.
I'm going to stay with you on your point about communicating that maybe to leadership, to the executives that you work with. How do you engage them on that conversation? What type of information are you providing? Do you highlight, the risks that you're facing, or the stress and strain that a team is facing? How do you have that conversation?
I think both of those things. So I found that if you go with a plan laid out for the type of support you need, a justification for why you need that support, the risks of not having that support, and then the facts that they need to know, like how much will it cost, how much time do that you expect that person will be needed, is it a full-time employee, is it a consultant, laying it all out for them and having a clear argument. I think that's how I tend to communicate with leadership on everything, not just this one particular issue. And it's the best use of their time too, because they can make a quick decision with the information at hand and move on. So,
Erica, when's the best time to identify that need for additional help? And how do you have that same conversation that Julia was just talking about with the executives that are running an organization?
Yeah, Julia hit all the points. I think the moment I start hearing, well, this was my experience, and then you hear from another person, well, this was mine, makes us all understand that none of us have an overall expertise to be able to really weigh in on that. And that's kind of when my red flag goes up and says, okay, we maybe need to have this conversation. And to Julia's point, I think it's always best to come in with as much objective data as you have and really highlight those risks, because most of the people on this call and most of our clients are trying to do things as quickly as possible, either to go fully commercial or to, do that out licensing, and to decrease risks and keep things as efficient as possible is in everyone's best interest. So I think Julia summed it up well, and I don't have a whole lot else to add. And then Katie, I don't know if you have anything else on top of that.
Yeah, no, I think you guys have both hit on the all the same points I would have. The only additional thing would be to highlight, if you're talking to the executives, is just the risk to not meeting timelines and cost. So as soon as that starts coming in, like how much additional cost it would be if you did not have this expertise or this person come on board, I think that can really drive the message home.
Yeah, in my experience, because I'll add in here, there's never too soon a time to raise that issue to anybody. If you wait, you will be delayed. And when you're delayed, you're going to come up against the same challenges that Katie just mentioned, against timelines, not just that, but also your budget. So if you're feeling the pressure and you're feeling the stress, it's time to have that conversation with the leadership of your organization to figure out, how you can address the lack of subject matter expertise or what other type of gap you might be facing with your development team. Maybe like in the last few minutes, I can touch on just the final aspects of, for all of you, what do you think it means to perform in your function for our clients? What satisfaction do you get out of your day-to-day in your project work? What do you think you could do better? Where do you think we're doing well? and how you apply your own individual style to that. I'll start on this. I am a drug development nerd through and through. I love the work that we do. I think that we have an incredible opportunity in front of us, and all of the companies that we work with have incredible opportunities in front of us. And I want them all to be successful. And so what I try to do is I try to apply my experience and my technical knowledge and in my analytical knowledge to help them do that. Where I think we can do better is in some of the things that I mentioned already. I really do think we need to focus more on the end game, whatever that end game might be, and put together pre-specified criteria that will adjudicate whether a program should move forward towards that end game or not. So companies can be more efficient in their development. I try to do that as much as I can, but it's still something that I'm not doing as good enough of a job on as I'd like to. Katie, just your style, the things that you find valuable about the work that we do, the reason that you're so interested in the work that we do. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm very motivated by the super science, and the very cool kind of methodologies and modalities, that the innovation out there. There's so much that it's just so exciting to be having these conversations with the executive teams, leadership teams, scientists. That really keeps me fueled every day. I think that's very cool, and it's contagious. When people are excited about their work, you can't help but be excited with them. I think what we can. So I think we work really well with different clients at different phases. I think we could do better. Is I think what Matt alluded to is really setting up some of these milestones and saying, okay, this maybe it's time to start thinking about a different strategy, or something that is going to make them really rethink the from grassroots what they're doing, and having them change drastically because they can't face up to the competition, or commercially it's not a viable target. That's a difficult conversation to have, and perhaps we should be doing more of that.
Yep,
I'll pass it on to Erica.
Thanks, Katie. So, I think what I get out of program and project management is just having people meet their goals. I think in a lot of cases, many companies, you're only going to, have one agency interaction every 2 years, or you're going to only have one IND filed for your whole career, whatever it is. It's really exciting to be able to be a part of these huge milestones on whether it's a submission or whatever it is. It's extremely enjoyable and gives me a lot of satisfaction to be part of that milestone and to help people get there. I think on the deficiency point, I think to Katie's point, it's revisiting your strategy more often than we're doing. I think it's such an iterative process, and we sometimes say, great, this is the plan, and we are going to execute that plan. And I know I am one where I will drill through a brick wall to get you to your plan. And sometimes that's not helpful for everyone, and making it so it's more of an iterative process, and really revisiting those initial assumptions on a regular basis is so helpful, and something that we need to be doing more. And then Julia?
I think one point is in program leadership and program management, even program leadership in a lot of cases, it just is in its nature a supportive function. And so, I get my thrills from working with people, and I like to help people and support people in what they're doing and get people better at what they're doing. And so I think that's kind of how I found program management in the first place, was I was doing all of these more technical roles, and they all serve a very great purpose, and they're very, very important. But for me, it's working with people that are doing these technical things and improving as a whole how the company operates. So, I agree with what you said, Erica, but I think for me, I'm not a scientist by training. It's more about the social aspects of everything that we do, and getting to help these companies bring these drugs forward. That's what I love about program management, and I don't plan on leaving program management anytime soon because of it. So
that's great to hear, because I don't want you to leave. You're thank you all for the very interactive discussion. We hit on some really good points. We have some questions coming in from the audience via chat, so I'd like to start to address those. And if anyone has any additional questions, please feel free to put those into the chat now in Zoom. And I'll start off with a question from Peter Karitko. Is it better to build a team or get a pre-built team that has already worked together in the past? So we sort of started a little bit with that concept. And I know, Erica, you touched on that. So I'll kick that right over to you. And then I'll get everyone to maybe weigh in on a couple of points. Better to build it from scratch, maybe a little bit, or get that pre-built team that is effective together before?
I'm all about effective teams. I think people personally can adapt to either new indications or new whatever else it's going to. But if you work well as a team, I think that trumps all, in my opinion, and really gets to the soft skills component. Because if you guys know how you work together, you can tackle pretty much anything versus trying to make your team perfect based on everyone's experiences. So that's my take on it. But Katie and Julia, feel free to weigh in if you guys feel either differently or have anything else to add.
The only thing I would say about having a team, and I've seen this quite a bit, where people will like leave a company and then the same kind of team will move together. The advantage is that they know one another really well. The disadvantage is that sometimes there could be a little bit of groupthink going on, and you need to have a different voice in the mix there. And sometimes that's Halloran Consulting Group who comes in with a different voice, or it could be somebody else that they've hired. I think that's really valuable. And having been in the position of being the outsider, I think it's of great value.
Great. I think those are both fantastic answers, because I very much am aligned with Erica's point. Great teams are great teams, but I also am very much aligned with you, Katie. You do need to have somebody who's going to check your bias, right? And you need to have somebody who can check groupthink. Angie Vassar has a really good question. How do you strike a balance between long-term strategy planning and near-term execution? That is like probably the biggest challenge I think that we all face in our careers in this industry. Julia, do you have any thoughts or insights on how you do that?
Well, if anyone knows what the perfect balance is, I would love to know, because I'm still trying to figure it out. But I think it's really important that those the long-term strategy doesn't kind of hinder the near-term execution and vice versa. So it's, I don't really have the perfect answer to this one. I wish I did, but it's getting both done in a way that doesn't hurt the other is what I'd say.
Yeah, I think the balance for me is making sure that both are highlighted on a daily and weekly basis for your program as you move it forward. I think sometimes the near-term execution can completely overwhelm the long-term strategy. And then, as Julia just mentioned, sometimes that vision for where you're going, that end game, can completely make the near-term execution impossible. And so it's about sort of supplementing each with the other as you go forward. And that's, again, going back to what I was saying before about, governance and stage gates and the development team structure. I think if you have the right development team and then maybe the right information combined onto that, you'll always have that information at hand, so you can sort of trade off risk and make the appropriate decisions as you move forward. Erica, Katie, do you have anything to add to that?
No, it's very well said. I think the only thing I would add is that I think it's easier sometimes to do this, that near-term studies and the near-term things are easier to handle sometimes. And it's hard for companies that are, they're very small budgets and they're stretched very thin, to take the time to step back and do the long-term planning. So it tends to be trickier.
Great. Are there any other questions from the audience? I see a couple comments from Barbara Tropin and another comment from Angie Vassar. I can just read those off for the audience. So Barbara writes, as boards look for new members, they often use board matrices to evaluate what skills they have and what they lack. Some members bring one or more skills, but help refine what roles to fill. That could potentially be applied here, and then decide whether you need to hire it from the outside. I completely agree with that. We're seeing that more and more. See that a lot with venture capital firms, where they're bringing in, drug development scientists and people with a lot of experience who are filling many different roles within portfolio companies. So it's really helping support maybe what some of that subject matter expertise need is. And then there's always an opportunity to think about that decision as you go forward. And then Angie Vassar writes, in a recent trend that program management is becoming more of a leading role within the team than a supportive role. I wholeheartedly agree with that. I think that that's why we talk about sort of leadership qualities in our panel today, and how Katie and Julia and Erica and myself and all of the people on our team focus really on how they can be the best leaders, how they can help teams move from the next stage of development from their current stage to the next stage of development, and make programs as successful as possible. I guess prior to sort of closing out the session, Katie, Julia, Erica, do you feel like that is actually more of the trend and more the case for you now, where as program managers, you're becoming more of a leader for your teams?
I do, and even beyond that, Matt, I think there's more and more companies that have this as a function. I mean, project management, yes, that's kind of across the board, but a lot of companies proceed with technical program leads and not more general program leads or program management. And I think that's changing too. A lot of companies see the value in having somebody who's not a technical expert sort of managing everything and keeping everyone on track. So I definitely agree with what Angie said.
I would say, yeah, I would say that I think you need to really embrace it as yourself. You know, speaking of myself, when I coming into a new project, you know, taking that leadership role and taking it on and showing value, I think that's really what'll convince people of your, you know, of what you bring to the table, and then people will identify you as a leader as well. So I think it works both ways.
And I think the final point to that is, it's just, I think a lot of us have a kind of a servitude approach, right? A lot of us as program managers or project man, whatever we function as, it's all about, give me the timelines, give me all of the tasks and let me track them, and let you focus on the science of it or the manufacturing, whatever else it is that makes your job complicated. And to Julia and Katie's point, that really starts to show that value, that we can take those major pieces off of your plate. We can help things run smoothly and let you focus on really what your job is, which is making sure, you know, your functional area is doing it the best it can.
Perfectly said. And I think that brings us to the end of our session. I want to thank Katie and Julia and Erica for being amazing teammates, but also being amazing panelists as well. If you have any additional questions, the audience, please feel free to follow up with Maria, and we can sort of cycle those through the team and maybe also bring in Carolina into the discussion. I will pass it back to Paula for any closing statements. But again, I just want to thank everyone for attending and thank my team for joining me. And we hope to be able to do this again in the near future.
Excellent. Thanks again, everybody. We really appreciate all of you joining. And we are going to have, for those that maybe haven't registered, there will be a town hall next Friday on the 25th around hybrid models and the path to designing patient-centric clinical trials. So please come and join and look out for the invite on that. And I really want to give a special thanks to Matt, Katie, Julia, and Erica, and Carolina, I know too, who just did a fabulous job on this panel. So thanks again. Great topic. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Phil.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Everyone.